War continues to be absolutely good for nothing. Hi, I'm Nick. This is 10 Minutes with Nick. And unfortunately, as we've seen in the news everywhere, the world has once again decided that peace should not be our primary state of being. For those of you who don't know, which I can't imagine is many of you because there's only 30 of you who listen to this podcast, and as always, thank you for listening. So Hamas, the international terrorist organization, and I feel quite comfortable calling them that because it's pretty much agreed by everyone that they are an international terrorist organization. Over the weekend, committed several acts of atrocities in the Israeli and Palestinian region, including launching several thousand rockets into Israeli civilian areas, and I don't really know how to describe it, dropping out of the sky into music festivals, invading civilian areas, indiscriminately kidnapping women, children, men, and taking them. Two parts unknown. As far as I know, there have not been any people found yet, and the perpetrators have not yet been brought to justice. This on social media has brought up a firestorm of emotion because there are a lot of criticisms of the Israeli government right now, and a lot of criticisms of the Israeli government for their treatment of the Palestinians. I am here to tell you today that right now that criticism is nonsense. That criticism is nonsense. It's not a strong stance to take, it's just the only stance to take. However you feel about the Palestinian people, they are human beings. However, Hamas as an organization barely qualifies as an organization of human beings. They have, for a long time, used the Palestinian people as meat shields. And as the US learned in Iraq and Afghanistan, the problem when your enemy uses innocent people as meat shields, there's no such thing as no civilian casualties. Agree with it, disagree with it. Those are the facts. And at a point at which your civilians have been kidnapped, your cities have been bombed, and your people are actively under attack and continue to be under attack, and an attack from Hamas emboldens your enemies, including Hezbollah, which also launched attacks from Lebanon on the northern part of Israel later in the weekend, your hands are tied at that point. You're going to war, both to recover your own people and to make sure that such attacks are deterred in the future. Joe Biden, the president of the US, and the government has already said they stand by Israel and will use all appropriate support. Curious phrasing, but I'm not going to get into that right now because I'm focusing on the actual conflict. And Iran has already said they have supported Hamas. Hamas has already said Iran has specifically supported Hamas as well. The problem that we see with this in a broader scale is that this is starting to look like the beginnings of a proxy war. The dangers of a proxy war is that larger powers are using smaller powers to essentially debut conflict. The Chinese government over the weekend boldly stated that the solution to long-lasting peace in that area of the world is the two-state solution. That is dangerous. Not because the Palestinians are not human beings and deserving of a country and a home of their own. They do. It's complicated, but they do. The problem with that is that China is saying that in the shadow of what is happening with Ukraine. Now, as we know, Ukraine, God, I hope it was only last year. Ukraine suffered an attack, an incursion from their neighbor, Russia. Russia, a much larger country. But Russia has taken and still holds a significant amount of Ukrainian territory. And world leaders have at certain points floated the idea of negotiating peace where Russia holds some of Ukraine as part of that negotiation. So essentially, what larger countries are testing is their ability to invade and start to encroach on the sovereignty of other nations. Now, historically speaking, countries' borders have moved, and they have moved as a result of war. The problem is, post World War II, the general concept of the world and the balance of peace in the world has been held by essentially holding at least most countries' borders stable, holding those countries' borders stable. And what you can do when you hold countries' borders stable is you create a single government, you create a single point of accountability for that country. Whether you agree with that point of accountability, whether that point of accountability is a dictator or a democracy, whatever, it creates a point of accountability that you can use to hold them accountable for what happens inside of that territory. Russia cannot be held accountable for what happens inside of Ukraine because Russia just wants to beat the crap out of the Ukrainians, kill them off, and use that territory to benefit its own civilians. Hamas wants to do the same thing. Hamas has made no qualms about this. Hamas wants to eliminate the Jewish people. They can't stand the existence of the Jews. They just can't stand it. It's a thing that bothers them. They wake up in the morning and they do not like them. They do not like Jewish people. The Palestinian people, I'm sure many of them live in peace with Jewish people, with Israeli people. There are Palestinian Jews. Like, the innocent people in Palestine are not the problem. Hamas, the organization, is. Hamas, as an organization, is much more similar to Russia and China than it is similar to anything else. Now, China is testing a war like this and is testing a proxy war like this because if it can test the sovereignty and decide sovereignty for other countries, it can look to its neighbor, Taiwan. Taiwan being a key US ally in the Asian region. However, China does not believe in the sovereignty of Taiwan at all. The rest of the world recognizes Taiwan, but China does not. Again, China is testing its ability to actively take over its neighbor, Taiwan, which has sovereignty and which has declared its own sovereignty and which the rest of the world recognizes. China still refers to Taiwan as Chinese Taipei. This is an incredibly complex situation, not just because Hamas is going after and specifically targeting and continuing its targeting of Israeli Jews, forcing Israel to respond in force as quickly as it can to both recover its own people and to make sure an attack like this doesn't happen again. This is being used by greater powers to float how this would play out. If the rest of the world essentially acts tough but turns a blind eye, we're going to see a lot more chess pieces fall. Now, the good news is the fact that Israel is as strong as it is means that this may quickly become a poor decision for China. This may quickly become a poor decision for the rest of the countries around the world that might think to do this, because Israel will respond swiftly, aggressively, and will not stop until basically the enemy is no more. At that point, when the threat is eliminated, or at least the threat has been staved off for the moment, go back to criticizing the Israeli government. The criticism may be well deserved. I'm not going to get into that. But right now, just know that Israel needs the support and the backing of the entire world, because this is not just about that region, and it is not just about these two groups. It is about larger forces watching and waiting, the same as Ukraine and Russia is about larger forces watching and waiting. Pray for the people of Israel. Pray for the Palestinian people. Pray for the destruction of Hamas and other terrorist organizations like it. Pray for the breaking of the Iranian government right now, and pray for the sovereignty of the Iranian people. Pray for the sovereignty of Taiwan, and pray for the breaking of the powers that be in places like China and Russia, such that most of these wars will come to an end. Pray for Ukraine, get Russia out of Ukraine, be done with that. And pray the US actually comes back to a place where it can hold the rest of the world accountable, which it can't do right now. Pray that the US gets back to a place where it is able to be a force for peace in the world as opposed to a passive player on the board, as we were before World War II and as we were before World War I. Those are my thoughts. I'm not much. I'm just a guy sitting at a computer talking into a camera. I have a master's degree in political science. I have a law degree. If you don't like my opinions, come at me. If you like my opinions, like and subscribe. Though that's not the point of the podcast today. The point is, I'm Nick. This is 10 Minutes with Nick. Have a great day.